Okay.
laid around.
What we're gonna do now on the A, now that I've done the lights, leads, and leaks and all the beginning, I'm gonna come back here and I'm going to look back here at the back. It's where my air compressor and my power steering pump, they're both mounted and secured to the side of the engine. And the reason I'm explaining this to you is because they are gear driven. They're not belt driven. And that's what I'm checking to make sure. I'm also, as I come forward, I'm checking all my hoses and my wires for leaks. And I'm also checking to make sure all the hoses and the wires are in good shape, that there's no dry rot, there's nothing, all the clamps are in good shape and all the hoses are in good shape. So what I'm checking is I'm coming from the back forward and working my way out. Right here is the dipstick. The dipstick is right here. What I would do is take it out, wipe it off, put it back in, and pull it back out and check the add to see where the oil level is. If it's on the add marker below, I would add oil right here in the cap that you can see right here. If it did not need it, I would put it back in, and then I could crank my truck because I know I have the proper amount of oil to run my engine. Right here also is an alternator. This alternator is properly mounted and bolted to the side of this engine. It's also a belt-driven alternator, and what I'm looking for on the belt is to make sure that there's no more than 3/4 inch play. I'm also checking to make sure it's not cracked, frayed, or damaged or wore out. What I'm also checking right now is I'm checking my steer column. My steer column, I check and wiggle it. I check it for 10 degrees play. And the reason I do that is I'm checking my U-joints here and here to make sure they're in proper shape and properly greased. What I come down to after checking on my steering column is my power steering gearbox. My power steering gearbox is sitting right here and properly mounted to the side of the engine right here. As you can see, all the bolts on the side of the frame of this tractor that I'm looking for. And what I'm looking at here is, as it is properly secured, this mount holds 3 different parts. It's just not the power steering gearbox, but it also holds a radiator frame, and it also holds my leaf spring. Right here, what I'm looking at here on the leaf spring right here is there is an eye bolt right here and one at the back. This leaf spring comes back right here, and it sits on top of my steer axle. My steer axle is right here, which goes from one side to the other, but it is properly bolted and secured by U-bolts right here, as you can see, with a rubber mount. And I check on these U-bolts to make sure that the bolts, the nuts and all are properly secured. I also check on my leaf spring to make sure that the leaf spring is not cracked or damaged and that it is in good shape. While I'm also checking this, I'm checking here that I have a hydraulic shock. I check to make sure that the top bracket is properly mounted and bolted to the frame, and also down here to properly mounted and bolted at the bottom. This being a hydraulic shock, the reason it's hydraulic, it has fluid inside, and what I'm looking for is leaks. If this hydraulic shock was leaking, then I would want to get it replaced because it was bad. Another thing that I'm looking at right here on my power steering gearbox is you can see the 3-piece steering linkage right here. This 3-piece steering linkage, this is a pitman arm, drag link, and a top steering knuckle, which are properly secured in 3 spots right here with the castle nut and also with the Carter keys that hold it. What this does is when I turn my steering column, my steering wheel, it turns this wheel. What helps this out is that I have a tie rod back here that is properly secured back down here, and I check for it to be no damage and what and in the shape that it's in, and I also see a castle nut and a Carter key back here. Now with this going from one side or the other to the frame, it turns both the tires. What I look at right here is to make sure that it's all properly greased and secured and there's nothing missing or damaged. What I'm also looking on, like say on the side of this frame, is any cracks, illegal damages, illegal welds or type like this. This tractor is a disc brake setup. And in the front, what I'm looking at right here is I have a single air brake chamber right here. And the reason I know it's a single air brake chamber because it's got one single air line coming in for my service brake. It also has an ABS speed sensor wire that comes in here. What happens is, this being a disc brake setup, when I step on my service brake, all it does is the air comes in, it pushes the screw inside the disc brake. What it does is matches the disc pads to the disc rotor. And what I'm checking on my disc rotor on the inside and on the outside here is to make sure that there's no cracks, no damages, and there's no ruts. And the reason I'm checking this is for the safe operation of my truck, so that I may stop and that I'd be safe around myself, for my company, and for people around. I'm also checking on the inside right here, the rim. The rims I have to check for illegal welds, because some people try If they're cracked, they try to weld them and run them when that's illegal. But I check to make sure there's no any illegal welds. What I also look for is I'm looking on the tire to make sure this tire is, the bead of the tire is properly sealed to the rim. I'm also checking the inside of my tire all the way around for any cuts, abrasions, bumps, or bubbles. And as I check that and I come out and come over, I check the top of this tire. And what I check the top of this tire for is to make sure there's no less than 4/32 tread on this tire. These tires have to be virgin rubber. They cannot be recaps. These are your steer tires. What I also do is I have a tool that I can check all around to make sure that this tire is wearing even. What I do once I check this to make sure that, I also know that this tire can have no less than 100 PSI. When I check the front of the tire, I'm checking for the same thing. I'm checking for cuts, bumps, abrasions, and bubbles. I'm also checking to make sure that this bead of this tire is properly sealed to the rim here. What I'm also checking right here is the valve stem. The valve stem needs to be in good shape also, and it has a cap to where that you can get to it. I'm also checking for cracks out here. Once I also get through checking, make sure that's secured, I look at all my lug nuts to make sure that they're all properly secured. And what I'm looking here is for rust and shiny spots. If there's a rust trail on it, or if there's shiny metal, means that they're loose and that they need to be checked and they're tightened. I'm also checking my wheel hub seal right here to make sure there is no oil slinging and that there's no grease thrown anyway, and I check the cap to make sure it's in proper shape. What I also check up here is, as you can see right here, this is my power steering reservoir. There's lines on the side here that you can see, but it also, with this cap, it has a dipstick that you can check and see if you want to check it when it's cold before you first crank it. And as I check all on this side right here, I check all hoses, all electrical, all air lines, all that I can see to make sure that all things are in proper working order. There's no leaks, no cuts, and no damage. Now that takes care of what's on this side. Now we'll go to the other side because I have a few things on this side that are not over here. When I come around here, what I'm checking also is I look at all my hoses, lines, and everything, and I'm making sure that all the hoses are in good shape. They're not dry rotting or not cutting. Right here is my water pump. I check here right so for my water pump because it's like the alternator. It is belt driven, but I also check this is a serpentine belt at no more than 3/4 inch play. I check for frays, cracks, and damage on this side. This is my radiator reservoir. I check on it. There's a cold minimum and a cold max. Also check right here, you would not remove this cap if this truck was hot. What I also check right here is my windshield washer fluid. I'd make sure that it has plenty of fluid in it so that as I'm going down the highway, in case it rains, I need to wash my windshield, it works. All the other things that I would check from here front and back is just like I checked on the other side. I check everything here just like I did on that other side. You can pause.